Having a good conference so far? Okay. My name is Jean Koch. I'm the Director of Programs for Future of Music Coalition. I'm the Director of the Artist Revenue Streams Project for FMC. For the last 2 years, I've been swimming in data collected from thousands of United States-based musicians about the different ways that they make a living, all of their different income streams. We've got a great panel for you today. We've got some very knowledgeable people who are going to talk about their experiences with income. And I thought maybe the way we could get started is, I think probably talking about roles. We were talking about how roles are so important in determining what income you have available to you as a musician. Can I just get a sense of who's in the room? How many of you are musicians? How many of you are artist managers? How many people work at labels? How many of you provide services to musicians, tech companies, startups, and/or attorneys? Okay, cool. Well, I'm a musician. I play violin, and I'm a touring artist, besides working with Future Music Coalition. One of the things that we found as we were doing our research project was just defining how income streams work for artists. So our project really had its start a few years ago when we published a blog post called 29 Streams. At the time, we were like, well, what are all the different ways that musicians make a living? All the different income streams that they use. And that was something that we had never seen anybody put together in one place. So we made a list. We came up with 29. We put them online. There were a lot of comments. People were very interested in the topic. And a lot of people were speaking up and saying, oh, you forgot about this income stream or that income stream. So at this point now, we've got 42 streams. We've listed them all on our website, which is money.futureofmusic.org. And when we talk about the 42 different income streams, we usually separate them out by bucket. So the idea, and actually I think that Erin, maybe this is a good way to do an introduction. You can talk a little bit about yourself, but also the different buckets and how that impacts your income.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin McKeown. I'm a musician, writer, and producer. And I'm also on the board of the Future Music Coalition and have done a growing amount of advocacy work in my career. I've been a professional musician since 1996. I have 9 albums out, the 9th coming out in January, and have started adding advocacy and policy work to my career in the last few years through Future Music Coalition. My income, talking about the buckets that Jean was referencing, for me there's 3. So I have income as a performing artist, I have income as a composer, I don't play other people's music, I write all my own music, and then I have income as a sound recording owner. I've been on labels, been on a number of different labels, big and small, over the years, and doing it myself right now, and have gotten most of my masters back, so I have a bucket that is a growing bucket of owning sound recordings.
When we talk about the 42 different income streams, obviously no artist has access to all 42. I know in terms of Erin's case, you've got probably like, what, 15 or 10 or 15 different buckets?
I have to go look at the list, but yeah, at least.
And then I know for myself, I play in other people's bands. I don't write songs generally, and I'm generally not the what would be considered a featured performer for those of you who were in the last conversation. I don't know if they brought that up or not. So a lot of my musician income comes from being a session musician, and that's the vast majority of my income, probably about 93%, because I think I just did the math. So 93% of my income comes from live performances, and then I have a little bit of money that comes from CD sales on the road, although most of that goes to the people that I work with. I've written like maybe 1 song, and I get mechanicals for that song. And I've done some recording, and I get a little bit of session money from that. And then there's a little piece of my money that gets administered by the unions. God bless the unions. It's called the Sound Recording Special Payments Fund. And that's for the time that one of my bands was on television or something. And then I ended up signing a lot of paperwork when I was there. And then a few months later, when they rebroadcast the television show, I ended up getting a check. So those are the different income streams that I have as a musician myself. I know, Erin, that we've taken a look at that for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that breaks down, and then we keep going down the line?
Sure. The FMC Artist Revenue Stream Project, if you haven't seen it, has really, you guys did such a good job with your infographics. They're really great, and they have these pies that, to me, are now kind of iconic, Your Life in Pie. And so as part of their project, I asked them to do my pie. And so I have my 2010 pie in front of me. I wish we were able to see it on the wall, but I'll just read it out to you just really quickly before we move on. So for me in 2010, I spend 100% of my time as an artist, and I make 100% of my income as an artist. I think those are important things to talk about when we talk about revenue streams, right? How are people putting their life together? For me, there's no other job. This is my job. So live performance for me is 61%, which is pretty typical, actually, I think, for most people who do what I do. My performance royalties, ASCAP, et cetera, are 15%. CD sales on the road, merchandise on the road, 15%. Merchandise, I'm assuming, remember we did this, that'll be off my website, probably. Merchandise sales off my website, 4%. Digital performance royalties, sound exchange, et cetera, 2.5%. And then my publishing income, mechanical royalties, and digital music sales all account for less than 2%. So if you look at my pie, the vast majority is live performance. And the last thing I'll say about my pie is that live performance money, right, 61% of my gross income, is pretty much zero when you put in my touring expenses. So for me as an artist, I pay my rent based on my royalties from ASCAP, CD sales on the road, of course less the manufacturing costs, and performance royalties and merchandise sales off my website. Touring is pretty much a net zero for me. However, I can't not tour, right, because that's going to drive all the rest of that stuff. So it's a complicated puzzle for that.
We'll move down to Chris from LeClaire Ryan, and you can talk a little bit about some of the artists that you work with. I know that you work with a range of artists, from very successful urban artists to younger kind of emerging artists, and I imagine that the highs and how their income comes together is really different from artist to artist.
Yeah, just for those of you that don't know me, you can call me Chris, but I have the big long name, Christiane Cargill-Kinney. I'm an entertainment attorney. I run the entertainment division at LeClaire Ryan. I represent a wide variety of clients, but mostly music, and I really enjoy, my passion is DIY, so I represent a lot of independent artists, actually, in helping them create their brand, and helping them with agreements, and helping them figure out how to make a living as an artist. So, we're a big firm. We have the big successful acts that are on major labels, and of course they, those traditional income streams are what they are, but for the people that are in the room that probably want to know, how do I make a living and what does the pie look like, I would agree with Erin that a lot of it comes from touring, and depending on what kind of show you put out, and how you're traveling and everything. I do see a lot of my clients make a profit off of touring quite a bit, but I agree that you do have to be on the road and touring and going outside of your area to really build your fan base and make any money. I shared with them that I'm also still an artist, and so my pie would look silly because most of my, I have a good paying day job, so most of my income obviously is as an attorney. So I can't give up the day job, but I'm also trapped in Los Angeles, so I can't really tour. I'm trapped in a pay-to-play state, pay-to-play city. So I make hardly any money touring. So it varies so much depending on where the artist is. It varies so much depending on genre. Some fan bases are very, very devoted. I did a niche album in Celtic music, and I couldn't believe how devoted those fans are in Celtic music. Don't everybody go out and do a Celtic album, don't you dare? But alternative music, I have an alternative band, it's a lot harder to find. And so you go back to the whole needle in a haystack thing. So it depends so much on genre. Also, with some of the urban acts that we represent, or rap artists, I see endorsement deals come up. And I was telling them, and I think it's fair with the advent of 360 deals to include this as musician income, but I get calls from music clients all the time, and I'll say, okay, what are we doing? And they're like, well, this is a little different. I'm doing a documentary, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I need your help. Or I'm doing a children's illustrated graphic novel, and I need you to put together the deal with the artist. Or, so there's all these new things where, they've created this brand, and there's other sources of revenue in entertainment that they're exploring more and more, and successfully. Samantha Hale did Map the Music recently, Will Gray did this great documentary, Broke. So, they had a lot of success doing something that they were completely new to, and it just kind of happened upon them. So I've been seeing more and more of that with artists branching out. And, now it's pretty standard if you're with a major label that they're going to want you to sign a 360 deal. And the concept behind that, of course, is that they're creating you as a brand. So if you're selling yourself in any entertainment genre or market, that they should get a cut of that. So that is the 360 deal in a nutshell. They vary depending on how pervasive it is. But artists that are doing it themselves are also savvy to the fact that there are a lot of different sources of revenue when you're creating yourself as a brand, and why not, branch out and do other things that are related, but a little different.
I think that one of the most fascinating things about the artist revenue streams, the idea of looking at things according to the different revenue streams, is that, as Erin mentioned, that there are different buckets according to what role you play. So if you're a recording artist, you have access to certain kinds of income streams. If you're a touring artist, you have access to other income streams as a composer, etc. But it also depends on what kind of a relationship you have with a label, as to what your record, what your income is going to be, where you are in your career. Obviously, people who have a higher profile in major record label deals, their income is going to look really different. Like their live performance might be a big part of their income, but another big piece of it will be, say, a record label advance or a publishing advance. So can you talk a little bit about some of the differences that you see in terms of people who are at a certain level and actually have, when you do reach a certain level of celebrity, you are able to leverage a brand and to go out into other areas that may not be available to artists who are just starting out?
Advances are quite large if you're on a major label, and even some of the subs. The smaller indie labels, the advance is a pretty small fraction on a lot of those deals still. But yeah, the big artists are going to be able to draw a quite large advance, and with the 360 deals, the advances have gotten even bigger because now they want to take 25 to 50% of everything you're making, no matter what it is, including touring. So, they have to pay for that, and so they've increased the advances, so that can be quite substantial.
Would you say that for some of your artists, in terms of label support and publisher money, that for them, would you say that sometimes it's more than 60% of their income or 80% of their income?
It's interesting because we were talking about this. I've never done the pie chart, so, to try to guesstimate it in my head, it certainly could be, but I've never had to really sit there and figure it out and calculate all the different breakdowns of, and some of these people, have they'll have commercials, or they'll be sponsoring a product. We do a lot of brand and endorsement type deals and things like that. So if they're a name, you can get quite a lot of money from that too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm going to be making pie charts when I get back to my office.
So our final panelist, who is also a musician, that also represents BMI, is Michael Drexler. And we've been talking a lot about kind of the recording side and the performing side of income, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about the different income streams that are available to composers.
Right, so obviously when we talk about the artist, that can mean a lot of different things, and artists can wear a lot of different hats. And one of them, obviously, is a songwriter hat, when an artist writes the actual musical composition and then controls the copyright for that. And within the US copyright law, there is a specific couple, I think it's 6 exclusive copyrights. One of them is the right to publicly perform your composition that you as the writer control. But typically what happens is that you assign that right over to a PRO, a performing rights organization. So in the US there are 3. There is BMI, Broadcast Music Incorporated, ASCAP, and a very small CSAC. What we do is we collect those license fees for public performance on writers' behalves and on publishers' behalves, and distribute the monies directly to the writers and the publishers. So that's where the system is a little bit different when we talk about labels and publishers, where there's sort of a black box around. You have to recoup your money first. We don't really know what the accounting rules look like. Are you participating in equity stakes or advances? So here it's pretty straightforward. We collect the money. We take 15% for administrative fees off the top, and then we distribute the rest to the writers and publishers. So in our last fiscal year, which just ended in June 30 this year, we collected about $900 million around the world and distributed $760 million of that to writers, publishers, and foreign PROs as well. So it's a very significant revenue bucket. If you take the whole PRO market, we're looking at a $1.9 billion market. So these monies are quite significant if you compare it to, let's say, digital recorded industry of maybe 5, 6, 7 billion. So that you can see that there's also a ballpark. So my role, I oversee new media licensing, which is everything digital, mostly streaming services. So we license Spotify, Rhapsody, Pandora, Netflix, Hulu, these guys. We have about 10,000 licensees. As a whole, we have a total of 650,000 licensees across the company. So in new media, we've seen actually a lot of growth. Even though public performance sort of collections have been stable, which we could argue stable is new growth, because if you look at some of the other revenue streams like labels, the market has been basically cut in half. If you take flatline revenues, new media has grown by about 25 to 30% over the last 3 years. So it's become, and that's actually not a replacement revenue stream. This is sort of an incremental stream that now writers see from services like Spotify.
And I think that, to put this into context a little bit, I think in a lot of the other panels that you're going to hear today, when people talk about revenue streams for artists and kind of where are they making the money and where they're not making the money, that, especially given Aaron's comment earlier about where are their expenses attached, that when you think about this a little bit more, and especially those of you who are musicians have certainly done so, that the reality and the bottom line for a lot of musicians is that the income streams that don't have expenses attached to them, like the PRO money, become more and more important to artists. And so it's something that's really important it's an important way to look at it, that if we're saying that, touring is doing really, really well, touring expenses have also been going up steadily over the years. I don't know, Aaron, if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I just was having lunch with another artist today, and we were talking about this sort of some myths that sort of get thrown around, and it's like, okay, the solution, in this new world of the music industry is to go on tour, right? That's the sort of thing that gets sort of told to musicians all the time, go on tour, go on tour. And the other day, I'll have to look this up and I'll put it on my Twitter later, but I saw a tweet come through my stream from an artist who said, look, anyone who ever says to you, just go on tour and solve it, has never been on tour, right? Yes, sure. It's a terrible experience in a lot of ways. It's terrible on your body, it's really expensive, and it's not sustainable. You talk to many, many artists, and I'm a healthy person and really take care of myself, and have not spent 20 years on the road puking my guts out and staying up all night. And there's a limit to it. So to me it's not a viable answer. So what Gene is talking about becomes more important, and as musicians we call it mailbox money, right? It's the money that has no overhead, that you walk to the end of your driveway and you pick it up.
I have to say, just personally, as a musician, so I play with bands. I play with a band called Pulp, it's from England. They asked me to play violin, I go around with them. I don't have any overhead costs as a side musician. And that's a huge difference between me and between Aaron. We both tour, we both get money from touring, but almost all of Aaron's money goes straight out the door as soon as she's done. We've taken a deeper look at it. For those of you who are interested in some of the case studies for our project, we're able to look at people who opened up their financial records to us, so we have 10 years of record label statements and tour receipts and things from ASCAP and BMI. We're able to look at all of that stuff and see kind of how things change and how things measure up. What does net look like versus gross? And that for a lot of touring artists, one of the artists, 80% of their income as a touring artist is going straight out the door to pay for the people in the band and for the plane tickets and everything. There's another one who subsidizes his solo career by being in a major band. He's a salaried member of a major band. So you're able to see how their touring expenses were not profitable for the first few years that they started doing a lot of solo tours. And eventually then they were able to start breaking even. But it was the salaried work that they were doing that made it possible for him to launch his solo career. So these are the economic factors that I think musicians have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But when we think about as an industry, something that Micah brought up, the idea that certain income is going down, where is the replacement going to be coming from? If record sales are going down and digital isn't necessarily going to be filling that in, a lot of people will say, well, will touring do that? And it's a really complicated question.
But in addition, also, some artists are leaving money on the table as well, and that's sort of mail-off money you're talking about. When I look at some of these independent distribution companies that we analyze, 30–40% of the writers are not affiliated with a PRO, and it's free. All you have to do is you go to BMI.com, you register, you upload your works, and that's it. But with the Sound Exchange, there's money waiting for you potentially already, and there's so many artists that just haven't registered yet. So there's 100% margin money sitting out there to be collected.
Yeah, for me as an artist, it's something that as I've learned more about it, and I've spent really the last couple of years like putting in the time to make sure that everything is registered properly for me. It's all going to the right place. That kind of thing is worth it for me, so that month by month I'm getting checks from all the right places and they add up to allowing me to continue to make a living. But I think maybe something that's unspoken here and I want to put out onto the floor is how important it is for these companies, right? So this segment of revenue we're talking about, how important it is for them to be transparent, for them to be responsible, and for them to be easy to use for artists. I have a Sound Exchange problem that's been going on for a long, long time. It's actually really quite ridiculous, and I've talked to some Sound Exchange folks about it, and everyone I've talked to has been great, but still can't solve it. But that's, I think, as we talk about what's replacing what's being lost, I think that this question of responsibility, transparency, and ease of use, and the ability to, I love this phrase, but clean the data, right? Easily to get it. I can't tell you how many places I've found where, for example, my name is spelled wrong in a database, or they have me connected to the wrong record label, or they have the wrong tour date links, and it's hard for, I block out my day, a certain amount of time I'm going to spend on trying to clean that up, because it ends up coming back to me in terms of this mailbox money. But I think that as the industry changes, I really want to advocate for, if you're in those pieces, and I know BMI and ASCAP, they do a pretty good job with that stuff, but can we do a better job, because it's really more and more important for us as artists that stuff functions properly.
For those of you who were in the metadata conversation right before this one, that actually becomes, it kind of gets thrown into relief a little bit, because they're all arguing about what are the good standards for how people are able to find music. And then there was the guy who was like, well, I was an assistant engineer on this and I didn't get credited. Well, what if you were part of a string section on an album and you weren't credited? There's still money that's probably being collected from you from the EF of M After Fund. But if they don't know where you are, how are they going to find you? There's a lot of infrastructure that gets driven in this industry by the major labels. And the major labels, we don't have to get into that too much. But the major labels are really in a position where people are really relying on them for information. And if they're not providing the information, somebody else needs to step up and help them. Help either them, or help DDEX, or help Sound Exchange, or help whoever it is that's out there that's trying to find these musicians to get that information. I think the union's done the best job that they can under these conditions, but this is just kind of I guess it's a call to arms for the musicians who are in the room to educate the people around you, the other musicians that you work with, successful musicians. There's so many successful musicians out there who have no idea what Sound Exchange is, for example. This is mailbox money, this is money that you can just go and collect, but you just have to give them your information. And I don't think that you should expect that they'll know who you are. I don't think you should expect that they know how to find you. Even if you do a 30-minute Google search, then you can find you. That doesn't mean they can find you. So there's a piece of this where, as we move forward into more and more of a data-driven kind of culture when it comes to compensation, that individual artists really need a lot of help. I mean, I think that's just where we are.
I also, CD Bailey has a great resource called DIY Musician, and they have a ton of articles that explain, all of the different ways that are out there for artists to get revenue. I write a monthly column for them on just legal issues, basic legal issues pertaining to the music industry. But a number of people contribute to that, and it's all about helping artists learn what's out there. They have articles about how to sign up with Sound Exchange and all these basic things that everybody should know, but how in the world do you keep up? Because the industry has shifted so dramatically in the last 10 years, and even in the last 5 years. And there's companies here today that I talk to that I've never heard of, and I'm doing it constantly, and Aaron's doing it constantly, and there's so much, there's new tech companies popping up minute to minute, and so it's a great resource, and there's other resources online like Music Think Tank, and artists getting educated for themselves and learning all of these different resources is so important, especially for the mailbox income.
So we're going to go to questions in a second because I'm sure that you guys all have things that you want to discuss. But before we get to that, maybe we can go down the panel and talk a little bit about, we've talked about the income that you have and how it all gets put together. Have you noticed any substantial changes in kind of how your income comes together from year to year, or how your clients' income come together, or how your members' incomes come together? Where has there been great growth? Where has there not been growth? Kind of what do you think might be some new income streams that are worth taking a look at?
It's all about t-shirt sales. Just make sure you have enough slack to
That's
sell.
what they keep saying upstairs, isn't it?
I mean, I've been in this business for a pretty long time as a musician. I made my living as a recording engineer, and then saw that business fade. And then worked for a major record label, Sony Music, for about 8 years. And then obviously during those years, the recorded music industry has sort of been cut in half, essentially. So I guess it's not selling records anymore, that's for sure. What we've seen at BMI, obviously we're pretty specialized in just the performing right, which is one of the 6 exclusive rights. We've been sort of growing in the last 10 years. We've doubled our revenues, and now, even though the last couple of years were flat, new media revenues is still growing rapidly. So again, there's streaming services coming in, internet, radio, audiovisual services that are now being streamed on demand that are creating really new revenue streams that weren't in existence before. So that's where I see the biggest growth from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously physical sales have dropped substantially, and we're on more of a singles model now. So that has shifted a great deal as far as a pie chart mentality. I've seen with some of my clients that don't listen to my sound legal advice and do it anyway. I have some very close people that do a lot of cover songs on YouTube. Not licensed legitimately, but if they have a number of followers, and usually you're talking in at least 30 to 40,000 range, that are following them, the majors aren't stupid. I mean, they know that people aren't going to go through the formalities of getting everything licensed, and people are doing covers and it's out of hand, and they can't rely on, content ID programs. Sony's more on the cutting edge than some of the others, but it's not you call them and see if they'll do it for you, but if you're high enough and you have enough followers, they contact you sometimes and see if you want to just do their list of songs, and they'll clear it for you and split, they get into a little partnership agreement with you so that it can make your YouTube channel more lucrative. I'm not telling anyone to commit infringement, but there are opportunities there because they obviously, for the majors, it's more lucrative for them to do that on the DIY model than to sue a bunch of people. For the bigger players, you see more and more, and it's almost embarrassing how much it is now. But you see more and more like car commercials where they'll partner with an artist, and they'll be doing a song that has nothing to do about their car, and so the branding and the sponsorship opportunities for the bigger artists have grown substantially in the last 10 years, even the last 5 years, where a lot of people are doing that and incorporating that into ads. And the touring's still a huge chunk for major artists. But yeah, I mean, those are the big shifts that I see right now.
I have 2 things that I want to say as changes I've seen. One of them, which could be, and I think was supposed to be at some point at this conference, was going to be its own panel altogether, but would be fan funding. For me, I use a platform called Pledge Music and raise about half the money I need for my next record from my fans. This is the Kickstarter model, everyone's pretty familiar with that. Like I said, I think it's a complicated answer, and I think we could have a whole panel on it. I don't think it's the answer to the music industry, and I don't think you can do it more than once. And I'd be happy to have an extended conversation with people about that afterwards. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. But that is one thing I see as a change in artist income streams and ways that people are doing it right now is worth mentioning. And then the second piece is just somewhat more personal, and I just want to add this, which is that for me, fortunately, I think, in the big picture, fortunately, my audience has always been about my age, right? So I started touring when I was 17, and I'm about to be 35, and so my audience has aged with me, and as I've gotten bigger, that it's spread, the window has spread, so that now, maybe there's people who are in their 20s who come see me play, and people who are in their 50s, but for the most part, my audience has pretty much always been my age, and it's been really great because I want to speak to my peers, and I want to be in an exchange with my peers and speaking to what's happening in all of our lives. And what's happening in people's lives right now that are mostly my age are they're having kids and they are not going to shows. And that is there's a crater, right? There's a crater in my audience that's happened in the last few years, and I expect it's going to continue for the next 10, until people have time and attention again and their kids are off so that they can come see music. And I don't know that there's a startup that's going to address that, but I do want to point that out as ways that artists' income is really affected by a lot of things, right? And I also think it's worth mentioning here, we have not talked about the recession, but the recession has hit all of us. And I think a few years ago I would have said, haha, here in the music industry, we've been in a recession since 2001. But really that's naive. What's happening now in our country and in terms of income inequality in this country is of a scale that we have not seen before, and I, in the music industry, whatever else, our small problems are nothing compared to the larger issues that are happening in this country. And so I do want to mention that as something to think about in terms of income.
Hey, Aaron, quick question. Did you ever consider streaming those concerts live through Stageit or some company like that for those?
Why, thank you for that softball.
No, but that's another, incredible revenue stream.
Well, about 4 years ago, I started doing something that Stageit now does. And I did a concert series called Cabin Fever, and I used Ustream and embedded it in my site and used PayPal as a tip jar. Essentially what Stageit does now all in one platform. But about 4 years ago, I started doing that as a way to raise money. I live in a picturesque cabin in a tiny town in western Massachusetts. And so I've done 6 of them now, and each have a different theme. It's basically Wayne's World meets the Judy Garland show.
And just to give a little bit of context to some of the things that you guys have been talking about in terms of Kickstarter, something that's new, fan funding, the branding stuff, the YouTube stuff. We did ask in our survey, we surveyed about 5,000 musicians in the United States about their sources of income, and we did ask about those things because we were curious. It's like how many musicians are actually getting money from YouTube, how many musicians are actually getting money from fan funding, and we actually found that 5% of the people who took the survey got money from fan funding. That's a little bit more than corporate sponsorship, which is 4%. About 1.3% of the respondents said that they got any money from YouTube. That some of the bigger pieces of money that people were saying that they were getting, not bigger pieces of money, but more people were saying they were getting this money, would include things like producing other people's records, and then actually union money, like AFFM special payments, secondary markets fund, AFFM Actor Fund, and then things like ARC royalties and things like that. So that's just to put a little bit of context on some of the things that you guys probably have been hearing about in terms of everybody's coming up with the next big thing that's going to save people's income. But I think that in application, when we look at the US, there's very little data to know how many people actually get money from all these different income streams. So that's one area where I think that even though we've done this study and it's been very successful, that there needs to be more work done so we can really understand that. Okay, questions?
What is the AFFM?
The AFFM